Rain since dawn. Patrick Anderson walked the sidewalk in slippers too large for his feet, a business card clamped between his fingers. The ink had smeared from damp, but the address was legible. He did not know whose address it was, only that he was supposed to find it. He stopped in front of a restaurant with floor-to-ceiling glass and warm amber light. Through the window, people moved with the confidence of those who belonged to the world he had once built, then lost. He pushed the door open. A bell chimed. Allison looked up from the host stand, saw the worn coat, the slippers, the confusion in his eyes. "Sir, we don't serve people off the street. There's a shelter 2 blocks down." She did not lower her voice. "Or try begging somewhere else. 5th and Main gets decent traffic." Patrick held up the card. His hand trembled. I need to know who. Who what? Who owns this place?" Allison laughed, bright and carrying. "Not you. Look at you. You can't even dress yourself." She stepped closer, blocking his path. "Go, before I call someone to remove you." The manager emerged from the back. Allison turned immediately, already explaining. "He wandered in. He's disruptive. He won't leave." The manager looked at Patrick. Really looked. And paused. "Let him sit. Offer him water." Allison smiled tight. "Of course, sir." When the manager turned away, Allison leaned close enough that Patrick smelled coffee on her breath. "You think you won?" she whispered. "You didn't win anything. You're still nothing. And I'm going to make sure you know it." She straightened, smiled, and walked past him 3 times without placing the water down. Patrick sat alone at the corner table, the card still in his hand, his chest beginning to tighten in a way he could not name. Across the room, Allison watched him from behind the espresso machine. Waiting. Welcome to the Billionaire's Vault, where every story carries a lesson, and every lesson carries a price. If you love stories that pull at your heart while keeping you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. Comment below where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew about power, pride, and the people we forget. Patrick stared at the glass of water that never came. The card felt heavier than paper should feel. His chest squeezed again, tighter now, a fist closing around his ribs. He knew something was wrong. Back when he ran his own company, he had known things were wrong before. But the words to explain it were gone, dissolved like sugar in rain. Allison walked past him a 4th time, carrying lattes to a window table. She did not look at him. She did not need to. Her silence was louder than her words. Patrick stood. His legs shook. He reached out and caught her wrist as she passed, his fingers closing with the desperation of a drowning man grabbing rope. "Please," he managed. Broken. My chest." Allison jerked her arm free. Coffee sloshed over the rim, staining her white apron. "Don't touch me." Her voice cut through the restaurant like glass breaking. "I knew it. Disgusting old man, thinking you can put your hands on whoever you want." Patrick's mouth opened. Closed. The words were there, somewhere behind the fog, but they would not come. He reached for her again, not to grab, to explain, to beg, but she stepped back, and her heel caught the edge of the rug. The tray tilted. The coffee was still hot, fresh from the machine, steaming. She poured it across Patrick's shoulder, down his chest, soaking through the worn coat into the skin beneath. He screamed. A sound that did not seem human, that came from somewhere deeper than throat, older than bone. His legs buckled. He hit the floor hard, the back of his skull cracking against tile. The restaurant went silent. Allison stood over him, the empty tray in her hands. Then she turned to the room, to the customer's frozen mid-bite, and her voice came out smooth as cream. "He hit the cup off my hands. I didn't do anything. He grabbed me, and he hit the cup." A man in a suit stood, dropped a 20 on his table, walked out without looking back. A woman gathered her purse, her child's hand, followed. Within 30 seconds, half the dining room was empty. No one looked at Patrick. No one looked at Allison. They looked at their shoes, their phones, the door. In the kitchen, Alice heard the scream. She was plating a salmon Wellington when the sound reached her, and something in it made her drop the plate. It shattered against the floor, and she was already moving, pushing through the swinging door, into the silence. Patrick lay on his back, eyes half open, breath coming in shallow gasps. Burns bloomed across his shoulder and chest, red and angry, skin already beginning to blister. Alice dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over his body, afraid to touch, more afraid not to. "Call 911, she said to the room, to the ghosts of the people who had left. "Someone call 911 right now." She pulled out her own phone. Her fingers shook as she dialed, as she gave the address, as she described a man in his 70s, possible burns, possible head trauma, possible cardiac event. She did not know about the cardiac event. She would not know until later. But something in the way he breathed, shallow and uneven, told her this was bigger than coffee. The ambulance arrived in 7 minutes. Alice rode in the back, squeezed between paramedics and equipment, holding Patrick's hand while they cut away his coat, while they started in 4, while they spoke in clipped medical shorthand she did not understand. She signed the intake forms as his guardian because there was no one else, because someone had to, because the paramedics asked and she could not say no to a man who had no one. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness is the only light in someone's darkest hour. Alice didn't know Patrick. She didn't owe him anything. But when everyone else walked away, she ran toward him. If this moment moved you, if it reminded you that humanity still exists in a world that often forgets, smash that like button. Subscribe and tell me in the comments, have you ever been the only one who stayed when everyone else left? The hospital smelled like every hospital smells, antiseptic and fluorescent and waiting. Alice sat in a plastic chair in the emergency room corridor, still in her restaurant uniform, coffee stains on her apron that were not hers. She had signed 3 forms. She had answered questions she could not answer. She had given a description of a man she did not know to people who needed to find his family. The automatic doors hissed open. Marcus Anderson walked through them like he owned the building, which he did. Charcoal suit, watch that cost more than most cars, an expression that made the desk nurse stop mid-sentence. Behind him, 2 men in dark suits followed, eyes scanning the corridor with practiced boredom. "Patrick Anderson," Marcus said to the desk. Not a question. A demand. "Are you family?" "I'm his son." The nurse nodded, pointed toward the ER. Marcus was moving before she finished, long strides eating the corridor. He stopped at the curtain, drew it back. Patrick lay on the gurney, unconscious, monitors beeping. Burns covered his left shoulder and chest, skin angry and blistered, weeping clear fluid. An oxygen mask covered his nose and mouth. His hands, spotted with age, lay still at his sides. Marcus did not move. For a long moment, he simply stood there, looking at his father, at the man who had once carried him on his shoulders through a company picnic, who had taught him to shake hands like a man, who had lost everything and never complained, who had watched from the sidelines while his son rebuilt what bankruptcy had taken. "Sir," a doctor stood in the doorway, chart in hand. "Your father suffered a heart attack. The burns, the fall, they were symptoms, not causes. He was already in cardiac distress when the coffee spilled. We stabilized him, but he's not out of danger." Marcus looked back at his father. At the burns. At the fragility of a body that had once seemed unbreakable. "He's going to be okay," Marcus said. Not a question. "We're doing everything we can." Marcus stepped out into the corridor. Pulled out his phone. Dialed from memory. The home attendant answered on the second ring, her voice small, already afraid. How did he leave the house without proper shoes? Marcus did not shout. His voice was lower than shouting, colder. How did a man with dementia walk out of a locked house, in his slippers, without anyone noticing? "I was in the kitchen," she stammered. "I didn't know." He must have. "I didn't know when he left. If anything happens to my father, you will be replaced. You will be more than replaced. Do you understand me?" He ended the call. Stood in the corridor, phone still in hand, and felt something he had not felt in years. Helplessness. The empire he had built, the billions he had accumulated, the power he wielded with a phone call, and none of it could reach into his father's chest and make the heart beat steady. Alice watched from her chair. She had seen him arrive, seen him disappear behind the curtain, seen him emerge with something broken in his face that money could not fix. She stood, smoothing her stained apron, and walked toward him. "Mr. Anderson? I'm Alice. I was there. At the restaurant. I called the ambulance. I signed the forms." Marcus looked at her. Really looked. Saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the coffee stains on her uniform, the way she stood with her shoulders back despite everything. "You stayed," he said. "Someone had to." He nodded. "Thank you. For what you did. I won't forget it." He walked back into the ER. Alice watched him go, then returned to her chair, to the waiting, to the vigil she had not chosen but could not abandon. Marcus sat in the doctor's office. The doctor explained recovery timelines, medication schedules, the fragility of a heart that had already failed once. Marcus listened with the part of his brain that handled business negotiations. But another part, the part that had watched his mother die slowly, that had held his father's hand through bankruptcy filings, was already back at the restaurant, replaying what Alice had said. A scuffle. Another waitress. Coffee spilled. He returned to the hospital room. Patrick was still unconscious, monitors singing their mechanical lullaby. This time, Alice sat in the chair beside the bed, her head nodding forward with exhaustion, her hand resting on the blanket near Patrick's arm. Not touching. Just near. Marcus looked at her uniform. The restaurant logo on the breast pocket. The same logo on the business card in his father's hand, the card Alice had found when she emptied his pockets for intake. He owned that restaurant. He owned the building, the business, the employees. He owned the chair she sat in, the floor she stood on. He did not say this. He said, "You should go home. Get some rest." She shook her head. "I signed the papers. I'm his guardian until someone else takes over. That could be me. I'm his son. Then I'll wait until you file the paperwork." She looked up at him, and her eyes were not tired. They were certain. He shouldn't be alone. Not now. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a door opening that he had not known was closed. He nodded. "Then we'll both wait." The restaurant was different at night. The amber lights were the same, the floor-to-ceiling glass was the same, but Marcus saw it through different eyes. He saw the corner table where his father had sat, waiting for water that never came. He saw the espresso machine where Allison had watched and waited. He saw the tile where his father had fallen, where his skull had cracked, where his heart had begun to die. The manager was closing out the register when Marcus walked in. He looked up, saw the suit, the face, the security detail by the door, and recognition hit him like a physical blow. "Mr. Anderson," the manager stammered. "I didn't know you were." "Gather the staff. All of them. Now." The manager moved with the speed of a man who understood that his employment was a privilege. Within 5 minutes, the dining room was full of servers, cooks, dishwashers, the bartender who had witnessed nothing because he had been in the basement restocking. They stood in a loose semicircle, nervous, confused, some still in aprons. Marcus stood at the center, hands in his pockets, eyes moving from face to face. This afternoon, a man walked into this restaurant. He was old. He was confused. He was wearing slippers and a coat that had seen better years. One of you refused to serve him. Humiliated him. And when he tried to explain that something was wrong, that he needed help, she poured hot coffee on him and let him fall. Silence. The staff exchanged glances, shuffled feet, looked at the floor. "I want to know who is responsible." Allison stepped forward. She had changed her apron, brushed her hair, applied fresh lipstick. She looked like a woman who had rehearsed this moment. "It was me, sir." Her voice trembled just enough to sound brave. "But it's not what it looks like. He grabbed me. He touched me in places he shouldn't have. I was trying to get away and the coffee spilled. I didn't mean for him to get hurt. I was just trying to defend myself." The word hung in the air. Defend. Marcus looked at her, at the tears gathering in her eyes, at the way she hugged her own arms like a victim. He felt something in his chest, a familiar anger, directed not at her but at the world that had made his father vulnerable, that had stripped away the man who had once commanded boardrooms and left this confused old stranger in his place. "I see," Marcus said slowly. "I'm so sorry," Allison whispered. "I didn't know he was your father. If I had known." "If you had known, you would have treated him like a human being?" Marcus's voice was quiet, controlled. "That shouldn't require knowing whose father he is." But he was already softening. He could feel it happening, the anger draining into something worse, something that felt like shame. He had not been there. He had built an empire to protect his father and then left him in the care of strangers, in a house with locked doors and attendants with headphones, and now he stood in his own restaurant apologizing to the woman who had hurt the man he loved most. "I'm sorry for what my father did," Marcus heard himself say. The words tasted like ash. "If you need anything, if you need time off." "Sir?" The voice came from the back of the group, small and scared. Marcus turned. A young woman, maybe 22, Korean, her ponytail coming loose. She had not stepped forward, had not raised her hand, but something in her face made Marcus pause. She was looking at Allison, not at Marcus. At Allison, with an expression that was not sympathy, not solidarity, but fear. Pure, old fear, the kind that lived in the body longer than it lived in the memory. Marcus noticed. Said nothing. Filed it away like a document in a drawer he would open later. "Thank you all for your time. You can go back to work." The hospital room was quiet at midnight. The city outside had reduced itself to headlights and neon. Patrick slept, monitors beeping their steady reassurance. Alice slept in the chair, her head tilted back, her hand still resting near Patrick's arm. Marcus stood by the window, looking at his own reflection in the glass. A man in a suit that cost more than most people's cars, in a room that cost more than most people's houses, watching over a father who did not know his name. He had built walls so high that no one could reach him, and now he realized the walls worked both ways. Her phone buzzed. Alice stirred, blinking awake. She glanced at the screen, unknown number, forwarded message, "You need to see this." She tapped it. The video loaded slowly, pixelated at first, then sharpening into clarity. The restaurant. The corner table. Patrick, sitting alone, hand on his chest. Allison walking past him once, twice, 3 times. Patrick standing, reaching out, his mouth moving. Allison jerking away, her face twisting into something ugly. The scolding. The insults. The deliberate tilt of the tray. The coffee pouring. The scream. The fall. And then the lie. Allison turning to the room, smooth as cream, her voice carrying the same words she had spoken to Marcus hours ago. "He hit the cup off my hands. I didn't do anything." Alice watched it twice. 3 times. Her hands did not shake. Her breathing did not change. But something in her face, in the set of her jaw, in the way her eyes reflected the phone's blue light, was no longer the exhaustion of a woman who had been doubted. It was the cold certainty of someone who had known the truth all along and finally had proof. She looked up. Marcus was watching her, his own phone forgotten in his hand. "Mr. Anderson," she said quietly. She held out the phone. He took it. Watched once. The scolding. The insults. The deliberate tilt. The coffee. The scream. The fall. The lie. His hands did not shake. His breathing did not change. But something in his face, in the set of his jaw, in the way his eyes reflected the phone's blue light, was no longer human. It was something older than anger, colder than revenge. It was the moment a man realizes he has been made a fool of in his own house, by his own employee, in front of his own staff, and the only thing worse than the lie was how close he had come to believing it. He lowered the phone. Looked at Alice. She did not look away. There was no triumph in her eyes. Only the same quiet exhaustion he had seen before, now mixed with something harder. Something that said, "I told you. You almost didn't believe me. But I told you." "Alice," he said. "Yes, Mr. Anderson? Where did you get this?" Marcus asked. "Someone sent it. I don't know who. I was going to show you when I woke up." Marcus nodded. Looked at his father, still sleeping, still innocent of everything that had been done in his name and to his body. "Thank you," he said. For staying. For this. For everything. He walked out of the room. The security detail rose from their chairs in the corridor, falling into step behind him without a word. Marcus did not look back. He had a phone call to make, and then another, and then a visit that would change everything. The arrest happened at dawn. Allison was still in her apartment, still in pajamas, still believing that her performance had been enough, that the billionaire's apology meant safety. The knock on her door was not gentle. 2 detectives, badges visible, warrants in hand. Charges: inflicting injury, aggravated assault, filing a false report, perjury. And something else: pattern of workplace harassment, documented, witnessed, corroborated by employees who had finally found the courage to speak. The trial was swift. The video was irrefutable. The burns on Patrick's chest, documented by medical photographs, were irrefutable. The testimony of the young Korean waitress, the one who had looked at Allison with old fear in her eyes, was devastating. She spoke of months of bullying, of targeted cruelty, of a woman who had learned that power in a restaurant was power anywhere, and had wielded it like a weapon against those who could not fight back. 10 years. The judge's gavel fell like a period at the end of a sentence that had been writing itself for years. In the gallery, Alice sat beside Marcus. She did not cheer. She did not smile. She simply watched as Allison was led away, her face pale, her lipstick finally gone, and felt something that was not satisfaction. It was grief. For the Patrick who had suffered, for the employees who had stayed silent, for the woman who had chosen cruelty when kindness would have cost her nothing. Sometimes justice is not about celebration. It's about accountability. Allison chose cruelty when kindness cost her nothing, and she paid the price. But the real victory isn't the sentence. It's the people who refuse to stay silent anymore. If this story taught you that one voice can change everything, hit that like button. Subscribe and tell me, would you have spoken up, or would fear have kept you quiet? Patrick recovered slowly. The heart attack had weakened him, the burns had scarred him, but something in his eyes, when he looked at Alice, was clearer than it had been in months. He did not know her name. He did not know why she was there. But he knew, in the way that dementia patients sometimes know things that bypass memory and go straight to the soul, that she was good. Alice stayed. Not because the paperwork still named her guardian, though it did. Not because Marcus asked her to, though he did. She stayed because Patrick reached for her hand on the 3rd day of his recovery, and his grip was stronger than it should have been, and something in his face reminded her of her own grandfather, lost to the same fog. Marcus visited every day. At first, he came with gifts, with offers, with the transactional gratitude of a man who had built his life on reciprocity. He offered to pay her rent, to buy her a car, to put her through school, any program, any dream she had ever buried under the weight of survival. Alice refused them all. I didn't do it for payment, she said, on the 5th day, when he offered again. I did it because he needed someone. That's all. Marcus looked at her. At the way she adjusted Patrick's blanket without being asked. At the way she spoke to him like he could understand, even when he couldn't. At the restaurant uniform she still wore, because she had not had time to go home, because she had chosen this vigil over her own life. You still work there, Marcus said slowly. At the restaurant. Alice looked down at her uniform, as if seeing it for the first time. I guess I do. I own that restaurant. I know. You knew. I figured it out. When you walked in that first night, the way the manager looked at you. The way everyone looked at you. She smiled, small and tired. I don't want anything from you, Mr. Anderson. I just want your father to be okay. Marcus felt it then. The thing he had been feeling since the hospital corridor, since the moment she refused to leave, since the way she looked at his father not as a billionaire's burden, but as a human being who needed care. It was not gratitude. Gratitude was warm and temporary, and this was something else, something that lived deeper, that had roots. He did not name it. He did not know if he ever would. But he stood there, in the hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and second chances, and felt the first crack in the wall he had built around himself, the first light coming through. The rain had stopped. Patrick sat up in bed, the the business card in his hand. He stared at it, turning it over, running his thumb across the smeared ink. The address meant nothing now. The restaurant meant nothing. The man who had walked through the rain in slippers too large for his feet was gone, dissolved into the fog that took everything eventually. But something remained. A feeling, a warmth in his chest that was not the heart attack, not the burns, but something older. He looked at Alice, sitting in her chair, her eyes closed, her breathing soft and even. He did not know her name. He did not know why she was there. But he reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and touched her arm. She woke, smiled, took his hand. "It's okay," she said. "You're okay." Marcus stood by the window, watching them, his own reflection ghosted in the glass. He saw himself, the billionaire, the empire builder, the man who had everything and almost lost the only thing that mattered. He saw Alice, the waitress, the guardian, the woman who had refused his money and given him something he could not buy. He saw, in the space between them, the beginning of something he did not yet understand. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent and eternal. But in this room, for this moment, 3 people who had been strangers 2 weeks ago were bound by something stronger than memory, stronger than money, stronger than the fog that was slowly taking Patrick away. They were bound by the choice to stay, when everyone else had left. This is where our story ends. For now, Patrick will keep forgetting. Alice will keep showing up. And Marcus will keep learning that the empire he built to protect his father was never the protection his father needed. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the people in your own life who stayed when they could have walked away, hit that like button with everything you've got. Subscribe to the Billionaire's Vault, because the stories that matter are the ones that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Comment below, who stayed for you? And who do you need to stay for? We'll see you in the next one.